Hey guys, it's Kwana back again with another review and a full-on recap of the Netflix original film, The Strays. This film was directed and I believe written by Nathaniel Martello-White. It is currently streaming on Netflix. It's been out for about 3 weeks now. And this film was a very intriguing watch that I think does some things very successfully and some things not as much. But I decided I wanted to come to you guys today with my full-on thoughts, a full recap, and a criticism of the film. And so I urge you to watch the movie first so that you can get a sense of everything, because I am going to be giving you all of my thoughts starting right now. So in the first scene of the movie, we meet our protagonist. Her name is Cheryl. When we meet her the first time, she is sitting in a London apartment. It looks to be an apartment or a small house. And one of the things I noticed out the gate is that the house has a very culturally Black aesthetic to it. There is a portrait of a woman with an afro right behind her on the couch. The news article that is sitting on the table in front of her is talking about problems afflicting Black people in London. There are different things like beads hanging in the walkway, and the house just feels very reminiscent of like my grandmother's house back in the 80s, of homes that I remember growing up in like the early 90s, things of that nature. And this woman is sitting on the couch, talking on the phone with what appears to be her sister. She's got her baby hairs, her edges laid, and she's a biracial Black woman, but she looks to be living in an environment that is screaming Black aesthetic and Black culture. And I think that is very important, that is the first time we meet her. She's talking to her sister about just how unsatisfied she is with her life, especially because she's won these accolades in her field as a sales representative. And she thought that her life would be so much more than what it is. And it isn't. And she seems to be suggesting that it's because of her race. That was very much, without knowing a whole lot about the film, very much that I got from that conversation, is that she felt as though her race was holding her back. She talks to her sister, tells her sister she's going to come by later on, but we see her packing the bag and she exits the premises. And the next time we see her, it is a good 16, 17 years later. It says some years later. And we see her, she is sitting at a vanity table. She's applying her skincare routine, and she looks visibly paler than when we saw her in the previous sequence. And it looks as though she's applying maybe a paler foundation. She's also applying foundation to her hands, which is also very important. We see her go outside, and she, although to me still looks like she contains the phenotypes of a Black woman, looks as though she is trying to pass for white. She's donning gloves on her hands. She's having this conversation with this woman where she's trying to affect a very posh accent, and talking about throwing some kind of gala, and inviting her neighbor and kind of provoking her neighbor to contribute more than she wanted to. She says like something like 550 pounds. It's kind of like a keeping up with the Joneses kind of aesthetic. And it looks like to be a very nice neighborhood that she's living in. We soon learn that this woman, because of the title cards on the screen that let us know whose perspective we're in, this woman whose name is Nev, and I looked it up, the name Nev, I looked it up much later, means like snow or radiant. You get the aesthetic that's going on here. And we find out that she has a husband named Ian, who is a white man. She has 2 children who themselves could passably be white, except for the fact that their hair texture perhaps gives them away. Their daughter is blonde. Their son is a brunette. Ironically, the husband's name is Ian and my husband's name is Ian. No relation, opposite sides of the coin. And her kids attend a private school where she is the deputy headmistress. She is a teacher of theology and she directs the choir. So she has achieved a certain amount of status in this community, and these children that she has are in the range of like 14, 15, 16 years of age. So that's important. her husband, she and her husband have over some friends for dinner, and her friend, one of the couple who is white, is talking about white flight and how all of these white people are leaving the suburbs as more and more black people are coming into the neighborhood. And this seems to be something that is quite distressing, although Nev's husband, Ian, is obviously seemingly a little bit more liberal than this. He's well aware that he's married to a black woman, even though it was very unclear early in whether or not he was aware of his wife's race. But then later on, the son mentions that they are black. And so it's very clear that the kids know they're black, and he knows that he's married to a black woman. But it was very vague at the beginning, and I believe that that was definitely intentional on the part of the director. That these people are just not woke, they're uncultured, and that's why they're leaving the community. But we know that they're leaving because of racism. And very soon we get the horror elements of the story start to take place as Nev continues to see a black man seemingly kind of haunting her everywhere she goes. And it's very unclear who this black man is, if he's someone from her past, if he's an ex, if nothing else, if it is the manifestation of her fear of blackness kind of catching up with her as she tries to run and hide from her blackness at every turn. And we see that this is going on. In fact, she sees this man at school as a janitor, and we soon see that he is a flesh and blood individual who is befriending her son and talking to her son, and this is very distressing. In this moment, Nev very much becomes a Karen in this film. She tries to get this janitor, whose name is Marvin, I believe, fired from the school, and her headmaster is like, no, we don't want to do that. That would make us appear that we're racist, and we don't want to do that. It's very unclear if the people around her are fully aware of her race at all times, or if she's able to hide and disguise her race at certain times, because she's donning this wig that increasingly begins to irritate her scalp throughout the film and itches her, and she's constantly scratching at it in a way that is like, definitely she is going to have some hair pulling going on and some loss of hair, the way that she keeps scratching at this hair. Eventually we get to the day. Oh, by the way, as we're learning about these black people who are coming into the neighborhood, we find out that her husband has hired a young black woman by the name of Abigail. And again, all of these things are causing her more stress. Then we get to the day of her gala, and this black man and this black woman show up and refer to her as mom. And it suddenly makes sense, everything we've seen so far, that these are the children that she actually had. It was a little uncertain. There were remnants of perhaps her having children in that earlier scene, but it was very vague and unclear. But no, she had children from her previous life, and these children have come to seek her out and perhaps take revenge. Then we get the perspective changing to the perspective of these children, whose names are Carl and Dion. And we see that they have come to meet their mother and perhaps reunite their family. Carl becomes Marvin, takes a job as a janitor at the school to befriend her son, Sebastian, who is his little brother. Dion becomes Abigail, gets a job at Ian's company, and befriends the daughter, Mary, and starts to teach her about how to do her hair, styling her hair in cornrows, giving her a pick. You can really see that the juxtaposition in those moments of the kids wanting to befriend these two black people because they feel so isolated and so othered in their community, but they don't know how to talk to their mom about it. And then things start getting really weird as Carl and Dion's behavior becomes very erratic. They talk in a lot of broken sentences. And I'm not talking about dialect here. I'm talking about, it feels very much reminiscent of like the Tethered in Jordan Peele's Us. A lot of Tethered vibes going on in this movie. And eventually, Dion and Carl go to this gala, which is actually, Dion says she never got a chance to go to prom, so she wants to go to the gala, and she ponders if they should have brought something for their mother as a gift. Carl says, we're bringing ourselves, and they show up. And of course, we come back to the scene where now we go back to Nev, whose real name is Cheryl, and we're in her perspective because the veil has been ripped off, and she now has to confess to her husband and her other two children that these are her children, that she had this other life before here, and that she's lied about all of this. Ian is aghast, and so are Sebastian and Mary, and they are shocked at their mother's actions, but they let her take the lead on how to handle things. And she meets up with Carl and Dion and presents them with a check for £20,000, essentially trying to bribe them to go away till she makes things better and they can reunite. We all kind of know what that's code for. She's trying to pay them off so she doesn't have to deal with them, and so she can make her happy life and existence go off well. Well, Carl and Dion are not down for that, and so they break into her home in the middle of the night and begin to torment her family. That Carl takes all of their cell phones and submerges them in water in the kitchen, and we have the background of like the kitchen being overflooded with water as this family confrontation takes place, and ultimately it results in the death of Ian. I forgot to mention that as Carl was befriending Sebastian, they kill one of Sebastian's bullies, or at least like knock him unconscious. It's left up to us, but I was going by the blood spatter and POV shot of the bully that he is dead on arrival. But ultimately, at the end of it, Carl dies. Now, they end up ordering Chinese food. All of their cell phones are submerged. And so they try to call a Chinese takeout place from a landline. No one's open. So Carl gives Mary his phone to place an Uber Eats order. She's not able to like reach out to anybody, so she places the order. And when the Uber Eats driver shows up, Cheryl, disguising, trying to like get money for a tip, goes and grabs some things in a bag and grabs her wallet, goes to pay the guy a tip, and then runs off with the Uber Eats driver, gets him to carry away, leaving all four of her children behind and her husband dead in the garage. And there, all of the children have now become strays, so to speak. This movie has tons of aesthetic, specifically kind of a Jordan Peele-esque aesthetic going on, which I think worked well for the format and for the formula. And I think out of all of the Jordan Peele-esque films that I've seen recently, Nathaniel Martello-White does the best at feeling like it's a true homage to that. However, there was never a moment where I felt like I could say this is something that feels unique to this director. But not for nothing, he is very heavy-handed and goes in on a lot of symbolism in the movie. But I think first and foremost, we have to deal with the question of race in here, which I think muddies one of the premises a lot and makes the movie kind of try to tackle too many things at one time. So initially, Cheryl is a woman who is unsatisfied with her life. It seems to suggest that she's unsatisfied with her life because of her race. So ergo, when we see her again show up in the world as a white woman, it kind of makes sense. We're going for a passing aesthetic in which her blackness is going to try to catch up with her. Now, if her blackness catching up with her had remained metaphorical, I think that that would have been a better premise. But then you can't make blackness the villain if the idea is that this is a woman who is running from her blackness, and it is white society that has villainized her blackness in such a way that has caused her to reject it. At no point in time does white society really play that much of a significant role in this movie in a way that makes society and white supremacy the villain. It feels very much like the blackness that she possesses is the villain. Her children, who are visibly and demonstratively black. When we see them on screen, there's rap music playing in the background. They have natural hair. They're wearing dark clothes. They're attached to the color red a whole lot in those sequences. They're the ones haunting her, and ultimately they're the ones doing violence. So I think if you're going to go the route of making this woman trying to escape her blackness because she views it as a sort of negative in her life because it's limiting her opportunities, then what you have to have her encountering in her current day and age is pushback from white society not accepting her, the ways in which she's no longer accepted because of her blackness, and villainizing white society's lack of acceptance really at the core of it. But the film just doesn't land there enough. Instead, it posits these children, these black children, as the villains. The way that they speak, the way that they don't seem to form full thoughts and sentences oftentimes, the way that Carl seemingly pushes even Dion around and causes her to perpetuate violence, causes Sebastian to do violence, gives him cigarettes to smoke, takes him drinking, gets him high, encourages him to be violent toward his bully. All of these are negative attributes. They're not seen in any sort of positive way. And the act of smoking, the act of smoking or even getting high isn't inherently a negative thing. It would have been very interesting to see the films kind of suggest that those cultural attributes that don't belong solely to black people anyway are not negative. In fact, perhaps if it had kind of structured it as both the white part of him and the black part of him engaging in these negative actions, and perhaps in the way that it's being used in one is more communal than the other, even that would have been more suggestive of what this film seems to be suggesting about race. So ultimately, the race part of the film just doesn't land for me because we never see her being countered by the whiteness that she possesses in a way that is negative, which only structures the blackness as negative. And I don't think that that's fair, especially because here we have her children who are biracially white children, white presenting children in many aspects, and they seem to be genuinely longing to get in touch with their black identity, but at what cost? To these children who are crazed and traumatized and traumatic. Even that, there's a sense of trauma that can be discussed if we knew a little bit more about the world in which Carl and Dion were coming from, but we don't. So then the more interesting theme that shows up is the idea of motherhood, and the idea that motherhood perhaps isn't innate, and that attempting to save oneself is a worthwhile attribute, should have been the bigger premise, should have been the main theme. But you would have to strip away the conflict that race brings in the earlier sequence and just make Cheryl a woman who just felt unaccomplished simply because life had, and the things that all women face had come up against her. And so she was seeking that for herself. And then perhaps what you do is, in the modern day you make her an unmarried woman who is successful, who doesn't have these white passing children, and these black children, whether they be dark-skinned black, or light-skinned black, were coming back to seek out their mother because they had become traumatized and almost kind of feral because of the lack of motherhood. Like, if that was the conversation, I think that'd be much more interesting. I just think that this film tries to do two things and insert two things into the premise and then doesn't follow through with them. But it keeps landing back on the motherhood thing. And at one point, Cheryl says in the film, she did what fathers have been doing for a long time. And that is the more interesting premise, that the idea that Cheryl, who is I say arguably, but also not arguably, the villain in the movie because of her abandonment of her children. Both times says men abandon their children and their offsprings all the time and are never punished for it. And they never fully reap the societal punishments of abandoning their children. Now, whether or not they deal with them in a personal level and later on in their life, but society doesn't punish men for abandoning their children. It gives them the opportunity to back away from being responsible for children by putting all of the onus onto mothers and saying that, well, mothers are the ones who have this innate desire to care for their children, not men. By having that narrative exist in society, that is the problem. And motherhood isn't innate to all people. All humans don't have a desire for motherhood. If you make that the premise, and because Cheryl made that claim, then you can only stick the landing on that if race isn't such a big issue in this movie. I like the idea, though, that she abandons all 4 of her children at the end so that she's unsatisfied. It's not the whiteness that made her life worthwhile. But again, it was in many ways, as long as those white passing children were willing to not bring up race, as long as her husband was willing to not bring up race, as long as she was able to have this white aesthetic lifestyle, she seemingly was happy and had not come up against any trouble. So we're left with kind of all holding the bag in this movie at the end of it all. I like the ending. I like the idea that she abandons all 4 of her children. If we're going with the idea that she is a horrible human being who has abandoned her children, but at the same time, she's a woman. If she's a woman who felt like she had to have these children because it was expected of her and not because of a genuine desire to have them, then it makes her actions a little bit more reasonable. When we hear her apologize to her children at the end, it makes more sense. But the film doesn't deliver on that. And so at the end of it all, we have Ian, who is dead because Carl is upset that Ian was willing to divorce the mother and abandon them, although he's not their natural father. And we don't know if he was going to be willing to take Mary and Sebastian with him, but he's within rights of saying, I want to divorce. I don't know who you are. You've lied to me all this time. You hit these 2 children, and now they're sitting here in my home and they're terrorizing and flooding my nice home in the kitchen. Like, he's within every right to feel that way. But Carl punishes him, and seemingly Cheryl gets by unscathed again, right? So she looks in the mirror one more time, kind of trying to see who she is. Ultimately, the film feels like a treatise on biraciality and who you're going to be in the world. But it almost kind of suggests that if you're biracial, you have a choice. But Cheryl still wasn't able to escape the parts of her that were Black. And I don't know. So suffice it to say, I just feel as though we don't know, because I feel as though the film starts with these questions, but there are no answers. But because the framework is that Blackness is bad in this film, and at no point does it really show up as being good, I feel like this movie is flawed for that. Aesthetic wise, what the film was trying to do, very cool, like symbolically, the use of music, even the classical music in the scenes where we're riding in the neighborhood of Cheryl's suburban neighborhood, Nev's suburban life, and onto the campus and all around her children who are with her children with Ian. We have these classical tunes being played, but then with her Black children, it's rap music and rap culture. I just really wish that we got an opportunity to see Blackness represented in the film as a good thing. And so for this, it just becomes perhaps a provoking conversation, but I can't help but wonder if we never get a sequel to this film, which I don't think we need one with the ending that we had. I don't think we need a sequel, but then it just leaves these conversations open and lacking. I would give the Strays a B plus for borrowing Jordan Peele's aesthetic and doing a very nice job of it. But in terms of follow through with the story and with the presentation, I would have to give it a C minus. But in terms of the acting was very nicely done. I liked the understatedness of the acting. I didn't have a problem with any of the actors in this film, actually. Thought they all did a very good job. So I definitely would give the acting a B plus as well. So and I feel like even with me saying a C minus, I was in a grade on a curve. I'm thinking that C minus is going to go to a D plus. So if we ballpark that somewhere, we're looking at a solid C rating for the Strays. And I feel like that's generous. I feel like the movie had a lot of potential, a lot of promise. It did some things well. I probably would watch the movie again just to further see some of those visuals that were so very aesthetically pleasing, and just because I'm still scratching my head about this conversation to be had. I just really wish that as she was confronted with her blackness, that the character of Nev, who's trying to escape, I almost feel like this movie would have been better served if it gone more the route of a black swan, and if we had almost a more literal one-for-one of us, in that the ghost haunting Cheryl was her black self. But let me know down below in the comments what you thought about the Strays. Give me your opinion, your thoughts on what I have said in my critique. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Did I miss something important that you wish I would have talked about? Let's have a conversation down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Toodles.